Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Education for the Appleton Area School District. My name is Kay Eggert, and first roll call of fellow board members. Nick Ross.
Here.
Jason Kolpak.
Here.
Chris Otter. Here. Ruffalo.
Here.
Peng Tao.
Here.
And James Bacon cannot be with us tonight. So please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and just as a reminder, for anyone who might be joining us for this meeting remotely, that the materials for the meeting can be found on board docs, which can be linked to through the district website. So I'm going to just follow along with the agenda, but first I'm going to ask if board members have a request to remove any of the consent agenda items for separate consideration tonight.
Okay, I'd like to remove 7F for separate consideration and discussion.
Okay. Any other requests? Okay, then seeing none, then I'll ask for a motion to approve tonight's agenda with the movement of 7F to, we'll put that under board business. It'll be 9F. It'll become 9F. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda as such?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. All right, any other questions or discussion on that? See none, then all in favor of that, the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Then at this point, it would be an opportunity for public input. The board does offer this time to hear from individuals who might want to share some thoughts with the board. We do have one person signed up to speak tonight. And before we hear from that individual, though, just some brief comments, reminders that we do have a board policy that does outline the procedure and the guidelines for speaking, providing public input. Individuals may speak for up to 5 minutes. We will have a timer going, and if any comments exceed that allotted time, they can be submitted to the board in writing. The board respectfully requests that speakers refrain from presenting comments that introduce complaints or concerns that are directed toward or identify individual staff members or individual students. Those personnel-related and student-related matters implicate a variety of rights that require careful attention. And so it's best to bring those up under a different format. And we also ask a reminder that a speaker retains all liability for his or her comments and conduct. So we just ask that the speaker refrains from any speech that is disorderly, obscene, threatening, harassing, or defamatory. So, and then because of the open meetings law, we cannot have, we could only have brief discussion about topics that could be brought up tonight that are not listed on the agenda. So with that, then I'd like to welcome Corey Otis to speak. Yeah, and there should be a microphone there. Perfect. And we'll get your time. 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Corey Otis, and I'm an Appleton Public Schools graduate, staff member, and parent. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of two groups, the Fox Cities Advocates for Public Education and the Appleton Education Association. The 2023-25 biennial Wisconsin State budget is on its way towards being passed, but does not appear to provide adequate, equitable, transparent, predictable, and fair funding for public education, including the Appleton Area School District. A modest per pupil increase comes only after years of low or no increases, and it pales in comparison to the record raises for voucher schools. The slight bump to 33% special ed reimbursement is far less than the proposed 60% and far less than we need. This forces districts like ours into a rob Peter to pay Paul type of situation. There are new grants and funding for mental health and reading instruction, which help our students. But the funding does not seem to be enough to sustain these programs past the 2-year budget. This austere state budget will ask more of taxpayers despite a $6 or $7 billion surplus. We're sitting on a surplus, and now is the time to make it right. So I ask on our board members, our administrators, and our staff, and our community, and anybody else watching tonight, please tell Governor Evers and your state legislators that Wisconsin can do better and that the public school students of Wisconsin deserve better. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. We will have an opportunity. We'll have an update on the state budget in the meeting. And so thank you for sharing those thoughts. I know I'll speak on just one board member. I totally agree with your thoughts. And so anyways, but we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that later on in the meeting. So thank you. We are going to move to item 5 on the agenda, and this is updates. And first, business services update. And Holly, welcome.
Good evening. Business Services has 2 items for consideration tonight. The first is the 23-24 meal prices. The item of consideration was included in your packet for tonight. And as we discussed at the June 12th meeting, we are recommending that all meal prices remain at the same level as 22-23. And that the only increase would be the individual milk price of 5 cents due to increase in the costs. And then our second item is the January through June list of gifts, donations, and grants to the district. List for the past 6 months was included in your packet and totals $655,782. You will be asked to approve these items as part of the superintendent's consent agenda, items 7A and 7B. Any questions? Ed?
Holly, I noticed there were, assuming a lot of parents from the classical schools that made donations for general classroom supplies. Can you give me a little bit of background on that?
So oftentimes if they have specialty classes, we will either have a fee applied for a specialty class, or if there is something in particular that they want to do, they will ask parents to, donate for things like that, especially at the charters where they're running specialized programming. I can't tell you exactly specifics, but.
And also, I'd just like to call out and thank Thrivent Financial for Lutherans. They made several very large donations to us this month, and I think everybody greatly appreciates that.
Thank you. Okay, the next we would have a school student services update. Dr. Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. School Services Student Services has 1 item for consideration this evening as part of the superintendent's consent agenda item as item 7C. This relates to the high school grades 9 through 12 secondary science text and materials, as well as curriculum update, adoption for physics, environmental science, applied genetics, and anatomy and physiology. It is our recommendation that this be approved as tonight as part of the superintendent's consent agenda. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And then personnel services update, Julie King.
Yes, good evening. Personnel Services has
Julie, I don't think your mic is on. Let's try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Apologize about that. So Personnel Services would have two items for the board's consideration. And that would be items 7D, which are new educator hires. We have 17 new educator hires for your consideration, as well as two changes, educator contract changes for the upcoming school year, with the one item being moved to the board business, which is F. Are there any questions on these first two items?
I'm sorry, are you going to also talk about the resignations or? I
Oh,
mean, could this be part of the update?
Oh, I'm
Or-
sorry. I thought 7F was moved. I would discuss it there. Was I miss?
Oh, that would be fine. I didn't know if it would still be presented and then we would.
Okay. I can certainly present it, and then if there's additional questions.
If you could just
below it,
present it and then we can have discussion for later.
Absolutely. So 7F would be 10 educator resignations. The educator resignations at this time, June and July, tend to be our heaviest months as far as resignations. So we are traditionally at the number that we have been the past 2 years, very close. The reasons include accepting positions, admin positions at other districts. So we have 2 of those, 2 relocations, 5 other districts or CISA accepting positions there, and 1 moving to private sector. And I will ask if there are any questions on the 3 items or anything to be deferred.
Yes, not, I don't see any at this time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then next we would have the board's consent agenda, which is just one set of meeting minutes from June 12th. Is there a motion to approve the board's consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Great. Then roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye.
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 Okay, then we'll move to the superintendent's consent agenda.
The superintendent's consent agenda includes 5 items for your consideration. The first 2 items, A and B, were reported on by Holly Burr during the business services update. The third item, C, was reported on by Dr. Steve Harrison during the school student services report, and items D and E were reported on by Julie King during personal services report. And I recommend approval of these 5 items, 7A through E.
I'll move approval of the superintendent's consent agenda, A through E.
I'll second.
Okay. Roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We'll move to reports. First, again, now back to Holly, business services report on the state budget update.
Since our last meeting 2 weeks ago, as Corey talked about, several items impacting K-12 schools have moved their way through or partially through the budget process in one form or another. Kind of a unique situation this year that they're running some through the traditional joint finance committee and some they're doing separate. Really, the only update I have for tonight is a clarification on the $325 per pupil increase to the revenue limits. It said that it was slated for year 1 and year 2, but then they also did a low revenue ceiling increase So it was unclear, but we do get that in year 2 also. So our revenue limits would move to 11,000 for next year, and then 11,325 the following year. What is still unknown with those numbers is the amount of equalization aid that the state will be funding in each of these years. And so then what the impact to our levy will be. And then just a reminder that July 1st, the DPI issues an estimate of that aid to be paid for the current year. So at our July meeting, we'll do another update then, and we'll have a much more clear picture what our potential aid increase is versus the levy increase and things like that. Other questions right now?
I mean, well, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, related to that aid estimate, does changes to aid require legislative action, or is that like that aid number? Where does that come from? How is that determined by the state?
So it's part of the whole, this 2-year, generally part of the whole 2-year budget process. It's usually included in there.
I know we talked about this a little bit last time, and I think it still is a very real concern. I mean, we are a low revenue district, so we could go to the 11,000, which means that we would levy to that. I mean, that will be, then our taxpayers will need to pay that. And then in the second year, well, then it gets complicated, but then that becomes, then it's aided the next year, correct? So, but in that first year, but then in addition, with the additional money that's going to the private school vouchers, we also can then levy for that. So I think that hasn't been very transparent that how this is going to actually impact the local taxpayers. I mean, the school boards are going to be given this opportunity, this local control that we can levy, but if we don't get the assistance from the state, then all of it will be on the backs of the taxpayers. I did have a question though, because I think the joint finance, in addition to the tax cut that they're talking about, they also were going to put some money towards the first, the lottery. What's the name of it, please? The lottery tax credit, because then would that help offset the increase in the school tax, or no? Can you explain that? Someone, Greg? Or
Go ahead, Greg, if you have a.
The lottery tax credit is something that's just one small part of how taxpayers are impacted by the revenue limit increase, right? And so it's very complicated. We're going to start with a number that is the revenue limit authority multiplied by each number of students. It's not our enrollment, it's our membership. Then from there, they can add in exemption dollars, which are like low enrollment or declining enrollment exemptions. And then the tax credit piece is calculated in there as well. And then the vouchers are calculated in there. And then from that dollar amount, we always hope as taxpayers that whatever that increase is, let's say that increase is $1,000 per student, that net increase, we hope that the net increase of the equalization aid is that same amount, so that all of the increase comes from the general revenue from the state, general purpose revenue. And so if it isn't, everything else has to come from local taxpayers. So I think it's easiest to explain that we want, as taxpayers, we want the equalization aid to increase the same amount as whatever that revenue limit authority plus and minus all those other pieces is. It's still very complicated, but again, what we're looking for is the state has $6 to $7 billion in surplus. And for the state not to spend that on increases to public education or to private education for that matter, and put all of it on the backs of local taxpayers really doesn't make any sense. Because that revenue is there at the state level.
Yeah, and that's just really, it's just hard, it's hard to, I didn't get a sense that they're going to be adding more to the equalization aid, but I mean, who knows? I mean, you don't know until it's all said and done.
It's out there. We don't know the per pupil number. So there is a number, and I didn't write it down, I apologize. There is a number out there that they say they did put into that fund for the entire. So something's coming, but again, to Greg's, or to your point, Kay, it's not terribly transparent because we don't have that number yet. We will have it July 1st, provided everything's on time as normal.
After the budget has been signed.
Correct.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that was the point I was gonna make, because none of this has been signed by the governor yet. Some of it's passed through some of the House.
It has
Senate,
not.
but-
DPI, however, has a deadline of a July 1 to give us their best estimate as to what they think we're going to be getting. In years where the budget is not signed, they will often give us a conservative number, but their best guess at the time. So that unfortunately or unfortunately, that deadline is independent of the budget. But you know, that's another week out. I'm thinking we're gonna, or you know, close to a week out here. They're gonna have a pretty good estimate for us. I'm confident.
Couple of questions, Holly. If I'm understanding you, that year one, it's either 325 or 11,000. Are we most likely to use the 11,000 rather than the 325? And then in year two, does that go to 11,325?
Yes, so it is, you're correct. It's one or the other. So if you are, they apply the 325 first. If the 325 does not get you to 11,000, then you use the 11,000.
What was it prior to this year?
10,000.
Oh, so there's been a substantial increase there.
Substantial increase, yeah. And there's
Positive for us.
a lot of districts in the state that are sitting at or below that $10,000.
Mhm.
So it's a significant increase for them. Ours will be about $744-$45 compared to the current year difference. We are at about 10,200 and some.
Where our enrollment or membership has been flat or slightly declining. Remember there was like a 2 or 3 year hold harmless, but that was expiring. What impact is that going to have for us?
That does impact us. So the hold harmless is basically you will not get less a percentage. So they have a percentage that they apply, but that your revenue cannot go under that. So for instance, if you have significant declining enrollment, and your revenue drops by 25%, let's say, the formula would not let you drop that much in 1 year. It kind of works, it eases its way back, so that you don't take that much of a hit in any one given year. So as you have declining enrollment, or as your income rolls back, they basically bump it back up to ease that shortfall.
And what we had been hearing, unfortunately, seems to have come true. It was either going to be per pupil or special ed. I know special ed was very small. I'm not even sure if it's going to cover inflation. How many dollars are we getting for? We went from 30 to like 33%. Can you translate that into dollars for me?
So our approximate increase, 1.5% would be about a little over 700,000 of an increase.
And we transfer 25 million each year from our general operating fund to cover
Last year
special
was-
education fund.
Last year and this year budget was 22 million.
Okay. So, I mean, this 700,000 is not going to make up
It's
that.
not going to change that.
It's not
budget
going to make up that gap.
So when we take the shortfall for special education out of the general fund and the shortfall for English language out of that, and we'll leave vouchers off the table from now, that $11,000 is really not what we're spending per pupil. What is that number really? 'Cause it seems like it's more like 8,000 per pupil.
It is. We have a slide for that somewhere, Greg.
Yeah, we did that calculation and we estimated, based on if you think about 100 students and receiving $10,256 per student of that 100. Then when we look at 17% of our students needing special education services, we spend approximately $21,000 on average. And then our students, our English learners, which we spend about $15,000 on. When you average that out of 100 students, what's left, those students that don't need either of those services, we spend approximately $7,500 on. And so our struggles that we see is that when more and more students accept vouchers to private schools, those private schools don't allow students with special education needs or students with English learner needs. So we are seeing more and more students that cost less to educate leave our district to go to private schools at vouchers. And it leaves with us a higher percentage of high-cost students.
And that seems to fall disproportionately to larger districts like ours.
It does.
So we're actually well below what the target would be for people spending,
Right,
given this budget program.
correct.
I think that's important for people in the public to try to understand is the challenges we face. It's not 11,000, it's 7,000,
Right.
7,500.
And we've shared that with our legislature several times.
And also just to keep in mind that the approved voucher payment for high school students is going to move to $12,000, which exceeds. So, I mean, it's also indexed to other parts of the formula. So we'll see.
And I believe special education is at 90% for vouchers of the few students they are willing to take, and ours is at 33%. So some equity would be nice, certainly.
For anyone who is interested, you can go to wisi.org and for a small subscription, you can access all of the videos of hours and hours of committee meetings, and it was pretty fascinating. So anyways, not totally fulfilling, but fascinating.
I had one more question. There was a statement that in year one, it's either the 11,000 limit or the 325. If for some reason we were not to levy to that maximum amount, does that limit the amount that we're able to levy in future years?
That's a great question. And it's complicated is the answer. Indirectly or directly, no. The limit stays at 11 and we could move to 11 at any time. The formula, however, if you under levy in any given year, it then somewhat restricts you the following year in the calculation. So the low revenue would stay at 11. What it would, however, is if we didn't move to the 11 this year, we cannot move to the 11,325 next year. You get 325. So if, for instance, we decided to only move to 10.9 or 10.8, we would get 325 on the 10.8. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think we have to keep in mind, and we'll have this discussion in fall when we have all the numbers and we are actually setting the levy. But keep in mind that we've gone 2 years without an increase at a time when our inflation has been higher than many, many years. And so that combination has really been challenging for our budget. So we certainly, you'll hear administration advocate for going to the 11,000 per pupil.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Holly. We will, at the next meeting, we will discuss this again and we will, I'm sure, have additional information to talk about. Okay, then we also would have a report from School and Student Services and Mr. Hernandez.
Please, you just put on board. Good evening. I'd like to discuss changes or shifts that we would like to recommend for policy 422.1. It's our international exchange program. The first thing I would like to point out is that the adjustments that we are recommending. I'll wait till we pull it up here. Not that one. Sorry. Not that one. I think it's the third one down. Yes. There are 5 points that we'd like to recommend to make to shift. The first one is not limiting the number of students who can participate each year. Typically, we have done 2 or 3 from each site. And we've seen great success interviewing schools as well, just to see, and we'd like to open up that number. The second one is removing some words in and removing the host family criteria from our criteria, as host families are not selected by AASD. It actually goes to the International Exchange Sponsorship Organizations, regional directors, and local coordinators. They do the interviews, they select the host families. The district does not have any say in that. The third one, per the Wisconsin statute 121.84, foreign exchange students cannot and do not need to apply for open enrollment. This will allow us as a district to review requests made from outside the district. It open up additional opportunities for students to experience the Yankton Area School District. The fourth one is shifting the statement AASD has a right to accept or reject placement from the host family selection to the student section. And the last one is just to update the list of sponsoring organizations. If you can go back to the first one you clicked on. As you're all aware that we have a list of organizations that we work with. Typically, we will ask to add one, or we do a trial basis, and then we would see how that experience went. If you could go to the one for ICE, the International Culture Exchange Services. This past year, the 22-23 school year, we worked with the International Culture Exchange Services. After having discussions with the host schools, they were very good to work with. They're responsive. You'll see it highlighted on the board. We'd like to recommend that they now move on to our official board or organizations that we work with. The last piece that I would like to recommend is that we would like to recommend a trial for American Council of International Education. This organization approached us and we would like to work with them on a trial basis for 23-24, which we have 2 families, 2 host families, 2 students that are working through this organization. So we'd like to bring them on, one for East and one for North. Are there any questions that you might have?
So is this a policy? It appears that this is a policy that the board has approved in the past.
Yes.
So the trial, I mean, that's stated in the policy that can just happen. The board doesn't need to approve the trial.
No.
But you would be looking then at the next meeting that we would update the policy with these recommended changes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So any other questions? How many total exchange students do we have offhand?
Can I get back to you on that?
Sure, I just like roughly, is it like a dozen maybe or across the district?
Somewhere around 15.
Okay, yeah.
We've had great success. The students have
Yeah.
participated in co-curriculars. including athletics as well, so they fully become engaged in our buildings.
Mhm. You don't have to spend a lot of time searching the information. I was just curious roughly how
It's
many.
actually
It's okay.
him, but I will send it to everybody tomorrow morning.
Sure. Okay. That sounds good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we are going to go on to board business. The first item, naming of the new elementary school. Artis.
Yes, so again, this is just an item for discussion tonight. And if you recall, during the May 8th board meeting, administration brought this topic forward for the first time, just to give some background information to allow for discussion. And, you know, the very unique situation in that when the district purchased the property, there was an agreement that was signed that we would name it Sandy Slope Elementary School. But what came up at that meeting was just a question, just gathering background information from a legal perspective, was that a requirement that we had? And so went and talked to legal counsel and brought back that information at our last meeting on June 12th. And again, no administration opposition to the naming, no board members have voiced opposition to the naming. We're just trying to gather as much background information as we can. So legal counsel did tell us that there is a requirement to name the school Sandy Slope Elementary School, but did give us 3 options that we could pursue if we were interested. There was no interest at the last board meeting from any of you to look at anything other than Sandy Slope Elementary School. But we did feel, and a suggestion was made, that we just find out from our community, is there any opposition? Is there anything we're not thinking about? Is there anything that would really preclude us from wanting to name the Sandy Slope? So over the last 2 weeks, and really we have been getting feedback prior to that, going back to the May 8th meeting, and the feedback that we received all very informally through social media or through emails to myself and sometimes to the board email account, all, I would say, majority supportive of naming Sandy Slope Elementary School. There was nothing that was brought forward that really made us pause. In fact, I would say it's 90 to 95% in support. And primarily it's people really like the historical perspective. They like the fact that at one time that area of our city was the Sandy Slope area. The school was out there and they really liked the historical aspect. So we've now covered administration, board, seemingly the community. There is no opposition that we have. So we'll give you time to discuss tonight, but administration would be ready to bring this for your approval at the next meeting, which would be our July 24th meeting.
I guess I have a question, more procedural, either for you, Kay, or for Kayla. The way this was noticed tonight, is there any reason we couldn't act on it tonight? Or would that be a violation of the open meetings law?
We had it as an item of information. So it's
Board business?
but if you look at then the document under board business, it says item of information. If we're going to vote on it, we should say item of consideration.
We cannot vote.
No.
We can't motion or vote on it. Okay.
No, I mean, we can say, next meeting, let's move it to vote on or something if you want to just. The point, I think because as, Greg had said, we were just gathering all this background information, and I think there's been plenty of opportunity for people in the community to hear about this, send their comments, and I'm
So my
comfortable.
only comment would be to build on that is to make sure that there's a vote next meeting on this one, up or down, one way or another. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm hoping I'd like to contact the Outagamie Historical Society. Is that what the family said they turned over additional information, the historical information about the school?
That's correct. Yes. So
think that'd
they
be fun to
have
have
a
that.
lot of information about the school, Sandy Slope School, and they turned all of that information over to the Historical Society. So look forward to, at some point, either we do that or it's always kind of a fun project for students to take on at some point. is to do that research for us. So we'd like to do that. And Board Member Ruthlow, we talked about, should we bring it for a vote already tonight? But we like to always bring new information, which was the community input, allow you time to discuss, and then bring back for a vote. So really closing all discussion tonight on this topic so that at the next meeting, it can be for approval.
Anything else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think based on the communication or the discussion that we had at the last board meeting, it's exactly the kind of information that I was looking for. So I think it makes it a pretty easy decision moving forward and looking forward to it. And there's no urgency to this, right? Like,
Anything else? Otherwise, just we'll put it on the agenda for next meeting to name the new elementary, it'll be an action item, name the new elementary school, which is exciting. So, okay, wonderful.
Sorry, I do
go
one
ahead.
thing, which is I have been already fantasizing about mascot ideas. So if anybody wants some ideas, I have them.
That'll be a whole nother topic. So that needs to be noticed before we start to talk about the mascots, but yeah, so that'll be great. Okay, we'll stick back to the agenda. We are going to now move to the Valley New School lease. Again, Mr. Hodges. Oh, Holly, great.
Valley New School. So as you are aware, the City Center Plaza plans to sell the current space that the Valley New School is in. And we are looking to temporarily relocate Valley New School until an alternate, more permanent space can be secured. We have an option to enter into a 1-year lease agreement with Hoffman Holdings and Pfefferly Investments on the second floor of City Center East Building. So the floor basically right above Skull and Leadership here. This lease would begin on July 1st, 2023 and terminate on June 30th, 2024. The details are included in the item for consideration in your packet. Any questions?
Has this been reviewed with the Valley New School Governance Board? Are they in agreement or satisfied with the space?
Yes, we've been in partnership with them through this entire process. They've been on tours with us, and in some cases, they were even reaching out to us saying, hey, what about this? It's not the perfect space. That's why we only want to do it for 1 year. But yeah, they understand and they're on board with it.
My thinking is that the main one of the main reasons why it is not a perfect space is due to accessibility concerns. Is there a sense of like, will students who have accessibility needs be able to get those needs met in the new space for the next year?
Yeah, so they have an elevator accessible similar to, they were on second floor previously, just on the, they're inside the plaza. Actually, this will be closer. They can still enter this main entrance that they're used to entering and use the elevator right here in the hallway. So it's okay. We're okay with the accessibility.
Just to follow up, oh, sorry. Just to follow up on that, will there be, an opportunity for students and families to give feedback about that specifically in the new space? I'm imagining it will.
Sure. Following normal procedures, we'll get feedback on how they're liking the new space. We're not going to make permanent adjustments to the space, given that we may only be there 1 year. So there are some things where, we're not going to be putting up walls in the new space or anything like that, or knocking down existing ones. So part of it's not perfect is the fact that we can't or won't be doing that. make it exactly how they would like it set up. But it's decent. It's larger than what we really need or want. So that, you know, that's kind of on the opposite side of not perfect.
Ellie, then is the plan to continue to look for other space for Valley New School?
Yeah, that's 100% our plan, is to continue to reach out to, you know, the community, the realtors in the area, and find something that's gonna suit the school very well as the budget.
Thank you.
Can you just speak a little bit about how this space compares to the current space in terms of capacity and cost?
So the cost is a little bit more than the current space. We would be renting it for about $15,000 a month, which is a little bit higher than what we're currently paying in the current space. It is also a little bit larger than the 3 spaces. So we have 1 large space up in Valley New School right now, and then 2 much smaller spaces for storage, and then some art, an art program. Those 3 spaces combined are smaller than the one that we'd be moving into currently. But because of that, the price is going to go up a little bit. Also why 1 year, you know, will give us some time to talk about options for this, you know, if the school, you know, wanted to stay there, it does have room for expansion. I don't know if they want to expand. If they don't want to expand, then, you know, finding a space that is more suitable to their needs is really our goal in the end.
Do want to add, Pfefferly has always been a great partner of ours. And so the price that we're paying next year for the lease is 2/3 of the list cost. And so we didn't ask what it would be long-term, but we're not paying the asking price of $20. Actually, it's even less than that. It's $20 a square foot. We're paying $12 a square foot on a 1-year lease because they understand the urgency we have in having to move. And so Pfefferly worked with the owners of the space to give us a rate that we could afford for 1 year until we figure out what to do long-term. So the space itself, it's more expensive than we can afford long-term. So we have to look at that. And then it does have a nice large open area, but then it currently has several offices in the back, which aren't functional necessarily for us. So, you know, ultimately we would have to look at build out costs if we were looking to stay there long-term. So there's a lot of cost challenges with that location.
And I assume then, Greg, there is no build out for this. We're taking the space as is, making it work for a year.
As far as I know, yes, and talking to facilities, our intent is to pick up everything from Valley New School and walk it down the hallway and put it in the new location as best we can.
It's been a process and so hopefully that it'll be adequate and it'll serve the needs and hopefully it'll be okay. And then moving forward, we'll see, but we have time to work on that. So,
Yeah, as I say.
oh, there we go.
We would appreciate a
do.
vote tonight. if
Perfect. Okay.
I
This
will make a
is-
motion to
okay.
approve Valley New School lease.
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion on that? Questions? Seeing none, then roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Okay, then our next item is item C. This is our coherent governance results policy 2.1.8, career and technical education. The monitoring report, we had spent a lot of time going through this at our last work session. And so now we could approve it or that would be the hope that we would be able to approve this. So I'll open it up though, if anyone has any questions or something they would like to review before we act on it. No questions. Okay,
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
guess I would just say, based on our discussion at the work session, my understanding of that is that what we are approving tonight, like that may not look the same next year. And so just for, any public who is watching, this is a process we're learning and growing together, and this is what we have this year. It may be different next time.
yes, that is true. So we would be acting on the acceptance of the monitoring report as it was presented. And then our modification and editing of all of our results policies will happen at another time this summer. So. Okay, so with that, would there be a motion to approve monitoring report R 2.1.8?
So move.
Second,
A second.
okay. Any other discussion? Okay, then roll call, please, Kayla.
Aye.
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 Okay, then we will move on to item D, which is results policy 2.1.9, financial literacy. And we will have discussion about that tonight or presentation of the report.
Thanks, Kay. And once again, Kristen Comerford, who is our coordinator of career and technical education and career-based learning, is joining me to share with you two other results policies, both again, which are in their monitoring report, but in their baseline year, which means we're sharing with you the baseline information based on how those indicators were written last year at this time. And as Kay had indicated, we will be sharing with you through two future work sessions, opportunities to look at both our operational expectation revisions for the 23-24 school year, as well as any revisions for the results policies. And so as Kayla calls this up here, you'll see that once again, the financial literacy monitoring report is in its baseline year as indicated on the cover page. And we focus really on two particular results within this monitor report. First one is looking at course grades for students in grades 11 through 12 in various financial literacy courses. And we had a very fruitful conversation last time as far as looking at participation and opportunities. So this is a little bit different lens that we're looking through tonight. This is looking at outcomes based on letter grades earned in these particular courses. And then we'll also be talking about community-based financial literacy opportunities. So with that, Kayla, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down further until you get to the part that says course grades. Yep, perfect, financial literacy. And Kristen will walk us through both our baseline data as well as what we have from the recent school year.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Up here you see financial literacy, and we're first looking at intro to economics. Just overall, just a reminder, our students can earn their financial literacy credit through intro to economics, which is oversaw by Kelly Leopold in the humanities department, or personal financial management that I work with. And over this past year, we had our monitoring, our beginning year data from 21-22, and then gathered our data at the end of this year. And it does say subject to change, as we have some students in summer school and doing some credit recovery. So that could change those numbers after that time being. But overall, as we looked at them in our intro to economics, which was 224 students taking the course this year, we saw that there was an increase in B's, which meant that there was a decrease in F's. And we also, though, did see when we were looking at our subgroups that something we measured our free and reduced population. We felt in financial literacy that was an important area to measure. We didn't measure that in any of our other policies, but we felt in financial literacy that was important. And we did see that there was an increase in Fs this year for that population. We also saw our students with disabilities and Black students had an increase of Fs in intro to economics. This course has not currently through the SBC course process, but it is something that we will be working on. As you look at the numbers, we were, if you want to go down to personal financial management, this had 917 students taking the course this year. Once again, we are looking at a decrease of 3%. And overall in financial literacies, almost all decrease, our Ds almost all decrease, but we do have an increase of our failures in Fs with our personal financial management. Our state standards recently were revised in financial literacy, and I worked with staff this summer to look and revise our SBC. It was one of our first courses that went through the SBC process, and it's a course that we continue to refine. We also want to make sure through all of our financial literacy courses that we are being responsive to all of our students, knowing their backgrounds coming in. Financial literacy is different for every student, and we have to make sure we bring that into to their education.
So when these two sets of indicators were written last year, at that time, the conversations we collectively had was to establish a base year. First, let's go back and look at 21, 22. And then as we presented the information to you this year, sticking with that same consistent metric of 3%. So anytime we've provided an indicator where we are looking to reduce gaps to match our scorecard process, we align with that by having a 3% reduction goal. So just to give you some context as far as why the 3%, again, to match our other indicators that are looking to reduce a gap. So before we move on to the community-based partnership indicator, any questions or discussion at this time regarding what Kristen shared, both with respect to economics as well as with our financial literacy, personal financial management courses?
Steve, just a question, especially on the English learners and some of the other ones, especially the way the percentages worked out. Some of this may be hard to draw valid conclusions because of a very small sample size.
Yeah, that to your point, that's a conversation we also had on the 12th. And something we may wish to consider as we think about revisions for the upcoming year with certain indicators, that when that sample size based on the nature of the indicator, the course, yes, your couple students is going to lead to a significant shift in percentages.
To follow up on that, I guess I have a concern about presenting the information in this way, because especially with certain demographic groups, when the actual number of students is going to be so small, like 1 to 5 students. That I feel like there's a concern about student privacy even. So I hope that we can kind of think through that a little bit.
Yeah, typically what we do in a case like that is it's acted, so then it's not presented at all. Anytime a student could be identified based on number of students, we see that in the difference between what districts have accessible to them for their state report cards versus what public has accessible to them. There's a slight difference between the two for that very reason.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just a question. Is there a difference in the rigor between the two courses, would you say? And might that be a reason we're seeing some of those numbers?
Could be, and I would like to bring Kelly to the counterpart, as she's more familiar with the intro to economics curriculum. That could be, but I would think all of our courses, we ensure that there's rigor in there. and that our students are meeting those standards.
And I guess I'm just asking because I think you mentioned that over 900 students took the financial literacy course.
Given, yes.
And, you know, I wonder, given the questions too about adding free and reduced, how that impacts students who may be choosing one course over the other. So that's the only reason I'm asking that question.
Okay, thank you. That's something we can talk about.
Chris, I can provide an answer, a little bit of an answer, just historically. When we first as a district adopted the requirement for personal financial management as a course, economics did not count for your personal financial literacy course. And so this was a general class that every student took to graduate from our district. And over the course of some years, the social studies department kept saying, we cover all those standards in economics plus more in economics. So eventually, as a district, we did say that economics does cover your personal financial management requirement with additional rigor, with additional, I wouldn't say rigor, additional content specific to economics. And so economics is taught out of our social studies department. Personal financial management is really kind of a standalone within, I don't know if we would, for a long time, it had its own department, really.
It really does. It can
Yeah.
be taught by business education or family consumer science teachers.
And so why a student may choose to take the economics instead of PFM is that colleges will look at economics as a core course when they add up the number of core courses a student takes. So some students take economics in lieu of the PFM if they want that to be reflected on their transcript. Some kids take both, but I think more students are starting to take economics in the place of PFM. Simply, it's additional content that they learn, not necessarily more rigor.
This data is very confusing. And it makes, I don't know, from your perspective, I mean, as far as in 21, an example in 21, 22, one of the groups, 100% of the students got a D. But in 22, 23, 0 did. I mean, it's just, do you think the data is reliable?
It's currently being pulled off of our
Okay.
our grades in our transcripts, yes.
I think that would be reflective of the small sample size,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
If there's no members of that group in this class in that year versus another year, you might get a 0 or
They all
some
pass.
strange results, right? So like, for instance, in economics in 21, there were 0s for Black students. I'm assuming that's because there were probably no Black students in class, or that or the ones that were there passed all of it. But to go from 0 to 50% is such a dramatic shift that it makes you think there's other factors that are involved there. And I'm not sure that the demographic information is as useful here if the goal is to reduce Ds and Fs across the board, unless there are specific demographics that we want to target because there's a particular issue that's not being served.
And that's a really good example of why this has been in a baseline year, because part of our conversation last year was we just don't know what we don't know yet. So to provide the information to you to segregate it, and if we were to see something that as a board, you collectively felt here is an area we wish potentially to further hone in on for the 23-24 school year, we could. And to Nick's point before, when we look under personal financial management, 100% students having a D within the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander subgroup in 21-22, hypothetically, that, like you said, could be one student. So it really begs the question, what's important? Is it just a broad goal moving forward to see a reduction? If it is to include desegregated, is it to also include then quantifiable values as well, number of students, because you're right, on its own, percentages also tend to bring on more questions. So something to consider as we come back to this policy in the future, as far as how could this indicator be improved?
Isn't there usually a minimum group size that should exist before this type of data is reported?
Typically, at the federal level, 20 is what we see for something to be reported out on when we consider our state report cards or also our federal identification reports. So 20 students or more for that subgroup to then be one that is actually calculated as part of an overall score.
I mean, because just looking at it, it would be hard to even draw any sort of thoughts about trends or.
I think to the point about the baseline year, though, it lets us know what we don't need to know. And I think as we go into looking at how to improve this reporting future, this gives us some ideas.
Well, and I just wanted to comment that I think the other part of it is that I'm assuming it's duplicated numbers too, because there could be one student that identifies in multiple categories, right? Okay. Yeah, so I'm in favor of disaggregation of data. It's just how do we do it in a way that captures what we need, to your point. And I think that this complicates it more for me, because it's like we have free and reduced, and then we have English learners. And I think that there could be duplicate numbers in both of those categories, very much, as well as male and female, that can go across the board as well too. So it is complicated for this, looking at it and trying to understand it. And then I think for me, trying to understand the decreasing of the D and F in these categories, like what does that ultimately mean in terms of students learning, right? Just because they get a D and F, does that mean that they're learning? Or if they get a C, are they actually learning anything if they get a C? So I think that that's my other question to it as well.
And then would it also be true that if like last year in 21-22, if a student failed, they still need to get their personal finance credit, so they could be in this current year as well, which I mean, I don't know what that means as far as what the data says, but
And I think, in looking at this, I think we complicate it by including Ds and Fs, because they are different in that you earn credit for the D. So really, a D is no different than a C is different than a B, which is kind of what you were saying, Peng. It's really, and it's hard to really come to any conclusions when you have Fs and Ds, because some Fs, are moving to Ds and some Ds to Fs. So I always think that it's best to say an F is what we're looking at, meaning you didn't earn credit. You're not on pace to graduate. You have to repeat the course. D is something completely different. D means you've passed, you've learned enough. It's not as we'd like you to learn more, but you've learned enough to get credit for that class. And so Ds and Fs they're significantly different.
So it sounds like what we're hearing is that if we are to keep these two sets of indicators for the upcoming school year, that it would focus only on reducing the failure rate and not including Ds, but then also, again, assuming that we were to keep this two indicators, also not disaggregated, just looking overall, are we reducing the percentage of students receiving an F in either economics or personal financial management? Does that overall capture the thoughts of the group?
Well, or unless there would be some groups, if you're trying to, see lack of success with some groups, and that you want to be the focus. But it's with this, I don't even think that we can identify that there would be a trend. I wouldn't even know what to try to identify.
It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to report that information without having that be part of the actual result, right? So we might say our goal is to reduce for personal financial literacy, but then maybe in some other report, we can look at some sort of disaggregate information to see if there's disparate results among specific groups that potentially would want to be targeted in future years.
Yeah, as always, it just depends upon how.
And I guess I still have a concern about reporting out really small sample sizes because it could identify individual students. If a student's family is paying attention to this board meeting, then they, I think it's just something we should be careful about.
I think that whatever, maybe it's a minimum sample size that is reported, or maybe we're going to report it wholly differently. We'll determine that after July 11th.
All right, then Kristen is going to walk us through the other indicator here. This is a little bit of a different focus. This is on opportunities and this is additional context. We've had lengthy conversations in the past about thinking about opportunities, perhaps more in terms of numbers of them versus percentages, because this is a really great example where if we're only talking about 2 opportunities to increase by a certain percentage would not likely lead to a productive indicator.
Thank you, Steve. And in these opportunities, I know that these are the ones, as I talked about, that we are offering district wide to our students. So we increased from 4th to 6th grade. In 4th grade, all of our 4th graders went to JA BizTown this year. And that was a really exciting opportunity to explore careers and financial literacy in many different ways. In 7th and 8th grade, our students went to FBTC and the Career Expo. So 2 very different ways to learn about, and it was through careers talking about financial literacy. And it is also part of their ACP course in 7th and 8th. In 8th grade, they have financial literacy, but that one was not out in the community. In our 9th and 12th grade, our students are participating in our reality checks. So in looking at that, the 1st grade band, 9-12, it is duplicated in that 2nd band as we looked at this. So we offer reality check in partnership with Community First Credit Union at all of our high schools. It is offered both semesters and all financial literacy. So intro to econ and PFM come through that experience. Another piece we did do, we had students who weren't able to attend reality check. They went to Finance Park. So JA offers a finance park, which is a simulation, very similar, but higher rigor for our high school students. So Central and a number of our alternative education students utilize that instead of reality check. So we really make sure to find and provide those opportunities within our community for them to practice their skills.
So I have clarification. This is measuring the events only,
Yes.
right? Okay, so it's not measuring attendance.
No,
Okay. Do we know how many students go to these things, or are students required to all?
They
Okay.
are, unless the parent opts them. Like for BizTown, JA BizTown, if the parent opted them not to attend the field trip, then they wouldn't have attended. But reality check, all the students come down that day. If they're absent, they work through the simulation in their classroom. They miss the interactions with our community members, which is a huge benefit to the experience, but they still work through the simulation. Yeah.
Kristen, you mentioned that students at Central went through Finance Park. So do students in all programming, then they have an option to attend that?
That was something PFM is taught at Central, and that was something Justin and I talked about. And he said, I'd like to go try it. And I said, okay, let's go. And they had a great experience out there. And I haven't connected yet back if they'll be attending next year, but I anticipate they said it was very successful. So the center is really in its, I would say, 1.5 years up and running. It closed it was set to open right before COVID hit. So they're now getting back in with all of their sessions at JA. So
Thank you.
If you have an opportunity next year to visit the site, it's really outstanding. local businesses sponsored individual areas. And so there's a bank and there's I'm trying to think something, government.
Mayor's office, you
mayor-
have electric, Amcor, YMCA is there.
Right.
Lies Den, so Fox Valley Tech runs the culinary center there. Peeper, yeah.
Yeah. And so students move around from station to station. It's very similar to what they do in the reality checks at the
Yeah.
high school.
Mhm.
Just not as neat of spaces because we do those in gyms.
Yeah.
Right, at each of our high schools. But again, those always receive just really positive feedback from our students. They'll talk about how that's probably the most valuable thing they do in their personal financial management class.
Great experiences.
All right, anything else on this? Okay, then, thank you. We can then move to R3 essential life skills.
Yeah, so the R219 financial literacy is the 9th and final student achievement results policy. So we have 9 of those, starting with ELA, going all the way up through financial literacy. And this is an R3 policy, so a little bit different, not focusing on student academic outcomes, but instead focusing on essential life skills. And once again, this is considered a baseline year, as our other results policy are as well. And Kale, if you scroll just a little bit further down, you're going to see perfect right there that there are essentially 7 different domains that make up the essential life skills policy. So cognitive development, physical wellness, communication, social development, moral and ethical character development, psychological, and career development. And so the indicators that we drafted last year are based on those 9 different domains. As we scroll further down here, you'll see where we start to then focus on those different domains through the indicators. So for example, where you see cognitive development measured through 2 different areas of the panorama survey, which you may remember is part of our district-wide survey system that we use. It's also connected with OEN, learning environment, and OE11, which is instructional programming. So in the baseline year, similar fashion where we're looking to see a decrease in certain areas. In other areas, we're looking to see an increase. And so in this particular case, looking under cognitive development within Panorama survey, we were looking at learning strategies as the category within that survey. And in particular, elementary, which would be grades 3 through 6, and also middle level 7 through 12. And as you'll see through the annotation there, KA 6th grade being part of that, since they are part of the middle school model. Our baseline goal was to increase by 3% the students who scored favorably within those areas. And so that's focusing on how well they use strategies for managing their own learning processes for each school level. Goal of an increase by 3%. You can see we fell a little shy of that for the elementary students and went down by 1% for the secondary students. Under self-management, again, this would be the percentage of students who score either a 3, 4, or 5. Again, this is self-scoring done by students on how well they manage their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. Our baseline data from last year was 76% of our elementary students indicated that they scored that favorably, and 65% of our secondary students. And you can see from our recent spring administration from this school year that went down for elementary by 3%, but went up by 4% for our secondary students. The next domain here, focusing on physical wellness development. You may recall that our Director of Health and Human Performance, Dr. Tai Zhang, as well as Mickey Duran, our Program Leader for Health and Human Performance, have previously shared with you through part of our school wellness policy, our school health index scores. And so this is an annual report that's put together for you as a board. And within that report, both Ty and Mickey shared the number of schools and the categories for those schools that were scoring as far as the baseline score, how they were doing in different areas. You can see on the left side the baseline data from 2020, 2021, and also the data from 2021, 2022. This is another example of lagging data, which is why you're not seeing the 22-23 data, because we don't have that yet. So just something to think about in terms of the indicator overall. When we compare the last 2 years, though, you can see how our elementary schools did. Health education went from 94.3 to 97.45. Middle school went down a little bit in health education. High schools went up, but very small amount there. Whereas you can see the physical education, physical activity scores, how those correlate from the 21-22 school year, 20-21 school year to the 21-22 school year. So in some cases that indicator would have been achieved. Others, we saw some increase, but not quite as high as we would like. And in other cases that went down. And then before I pause here, cognitive development, again, another domain, going back to the panorama survey for elementary, you can see how our students scored themselves as far as favorably in the 22 school year. Elementary was 63%. That went up by 2% for spring of this past year, but our arbitrary goal was 3%, so just a little shy there. And at the secondary level, that went down by a little bit. And then if you, maybe I looked at the wrong one. Oh, no, perfect. And then the last piece here, you can see what that looks like for the overall rating, excellence rating. And again, that's a rating we received from the state for different schools. You can see that went up for elementary, that went down for middle level, but again, keeping in mind for middle level schools. So think about sample size. And then high schools, again, small sample size, stayed at 100%. So before we look at youth risk behavior survey, let me pause there for any questions you may have.
So the Action for Healthy Kids, the school health index, that data is generated from school sites filling out something. We're not asking students to evaluate any sort of self-assessment of their
Right.
physical
It's
wellness development. This
completed
is,
in collaboration between the principal and the school wellness team.
yeah,
And then we get the overall report from the state. So, right, in some cases, you have self-identification or self-reporting as part of the metric, which is what makes up the school health index report.
I'll just note that for the July 11th discussion. I mean, I don't know how,
Yeah, I was gonna say, my feedback is gonna be really similar, I think, to a lot of the other things we've talked about, where I think we just need to revisit a lot of these metrics, knowing what we know now and just figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. Because I think in some cases it does, and in some other cases it doesn't. Similar feedback as to the other ones.
So Steve, a question, for example, under learning strategies. See the number, where they're going. And I honestly have had people in the community ask me, well, what does the school do? Not so much just to teach the subject material, but to help our students learn how to learn good studies habits and those kind of things. And it's been hard for me to answer that question. So if this number is lower than we would like, well, what do we do about that? Well, what are we as a district doing to help our students understand when they come to a course, how to really excel at that course, how to digest that material? Is that it's assumed that each teacher does that? Do we have specific instruction on that? So I always thought those are very good questions from some of the parents, and curious as to what your response to that is.
Yeah, and certainly think after I give you my 2 cents on this piece. Maybe you want to speak on the middle school level as far as the life skills piece there. As part of our overall courses, our district-wide focus, you may recall we have 3 primary focus areas that we've been really honing in on as a district. Being culturally and linguistically responsive, instructional responses to behavior, and then teacher clarity. And so to answer your question specifically, I'd say it's that teacher clarity piece, because as part of that, we're not only focusing on the instructional side of what is it that as a teacher, I want my students to know and be able to do, and then also how will I know if they're able to through success criteria. But then as part of that, how we work with our students throughout their learning so that they see where they are in terms of that goal, how much further perhaps they need to be, and really working on that metacognitive piece of understanding. A lot of times we call that assessment literacy, right? Understanding where am I in the big picture of things as a learner. And then from there, also incorporating some of our other strategies when we think about our soft landing work that we do with our students. When we think about also the current life skills pieces, that when we separate the behavior part from the actual student outcome piece, what are those other things that we need to focus on within our learning? So I don't think it's one thing in particular we're doing as a district. I think it's multiple things. One of the key things is really being clear on what does success look like in learning, and then what do we need to do to close that gap when students and teachers alike are seeing we're not quite there yet. But at the middle level, we also have a course that focuses as well.
Well, in our academic and career planning, in 6th grade, they do figure out and do some surveys about their interests, but it also talks about what type of learner they are. And then through academic and career planning, we do work to build in some of those skills. And I also think before that, they're working to build those skills in elementary. I think of the students who are starting to write in their planners, or they're given an organizational chart, or they're taught how to use a graphic organizer. So there's strategies that are building and building over time when they're in. I think it's part of the teacher's instruction. They may be teaching them literacy, but they're first going to teach them how to organize it and then get into the content. So the students may not see it as separate learning, but they're doing that. And then they support those students who may need some extra organizational help in those components. But we do bring it out in academic and career plans.
Because I always worry a bit about, even from my own children's experience, if you get into a course, it's a stretch for you. Pre-calc, maybe that's probably a stretch for everybody. So there is a certain barrier to really do the students clearly understand, how do you digest a very complicated course? I know a lot of the colleges, they only didn't do that when I went to 100 years ago, but they're doing it now. They actually have the first semester freshman year, there's really an entire course on just it's called surviving college, or how to excel at college, where they go through everything, right? How to use a library, how to use electronic, how really to pace yourself, how to study, how to really organize your work so you're not overwhelmed by the et cetera. So this is more of a thought question, because this is all research anyways, but I sometimes wonder if we should be addressing those types of topics a bit more head on, rather than in just as in passing in each class. So just something for everybody to think about.
And I mean, I'm kind of wondering the same thing that Ed is. Like, for example, when I was in public school, in different classes, we were taught how to take notes in a very specific way. And often we had to turn in our notebooks, and we would even get graded on how we took notes. Like, is that kind of instruction going on in the schools?
So our teachers are certainly still incorporating much of the study skill pieces and organizational skills pieces you referenced. One of the biggest changes, though, is that that's not part of your overall course grade, right? So we're still providing that feedback through our progress reporting, but it's not part of the grade that we issue at the end of the semester. Any other questions before we move further?
Question, you mentioned 6th grade. Kind of looking at their career options.
Yeah.
As part of that, are parents involved at all in that process? Because I guess I think about how parents may be able to identify certain skills or maybe deficit areas that their students have that might be beneficial to that process.
I can't speak to how each teacher engages their students, but the surveys are taken through Zello. And Zello has released a family option that we're working with to release to families, so then parents could observe what is happening. So there is that way for them. If they could, if we encourage the students to take home their Chromebook, open it up, show their parents what they have been doing in Zello. A lot of them also do a reflective paper about it. They build it into their ELA. What did you learn? What are you shocked about? What are you excited about? But we are looking to engage parents more in that.
And then in the area of the high school or the teams reporting out for that wellness score. I believe that we've had in the past, there have been some differences in how some of the schools actually conducted that. And I'm wondering if that is a more consistent process now, or is it just a team that fills that out, or could it be the entire staff, or if you're aware of that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chris. I believe it's designed so that one overall score is submitted on behalf of the school. And so I think we'd have to think about what that needs to look like if we were to expand the number of people contributing to the score overall. And then also, I believe the participation had been better from the previous year when we did see some discrepancies as well as far as number of schools actually completing that survey. I think it also just comes back to the overall thoughts you have as a board of self-reporting. How important is that to you as part of an overall set of indicators? Because with that does come a number of variables such as participation, who's actually submitting the score, how is that collected? Is it individually, one principal in a small team, big team, very large team? So certainly some things to consider.
I guess that would be my thought or concern, that we would hope that that would be consistent, but if it is different from school to school, is that an accurate reflection in this reporting? Thank you.
Kayla, if you wouldn't mind scrolling up a little bit to page 7, I think is where we left off. Perfect, thank you. So the next piece here, I think demonstrates that we had really good and ambitious intentions when we were reading these indicators a year ago. But just to explain some of the ambiguity in the language, you'll notice that for the youth risk behavior survey, we said we will decrease the percentage of students by X%. So we didn't know at the time, who demonstrate higher risks, think about certain behaviors, which we just put a placeholder of Y, the letter Y there, as identified through our survey. So again, additional context for everyone is that historically, use of tobacco has been that identified risk behavior. And we had, again, a pretty lengthy conversation last year about, well, let's wait a little bit before we automatically say tobacco use, because that may not be what our data actually shows us. Another piece to this is that it's not only lagging data, so we're just receiving the 2021-22 data, which is why it's not currently there. It's also every other year as far as the administration. So at this time, we don't have values to report back to you, but one thing to consider as far as updating this result policy is if we do wish to keep this as an indicator, we need to keep that in mind. This one is lagging, so we really can't respond to it in a timely manner. I think we had some really good intentions at the time, but we just full transparency, we cannot respond in a timely manner. And it's also every other year, so it's not something we would be comparing in consecutive years. So I just wanted to explain why you're seeing the NAs there at this time. Okay. All right, and then as you scroll further down here, Kayla, we will see within the communications and social development domain, social awareness. This is just the overall category within the Panorama survey. So there's several different categories, and this one being social awareness. And our goal was to increase the percentage of students who score a 3, 4, or 5, indicating favorably on the extent to which they consider the perspectives of others and empathize with them. So again, this is students rating themselves to the extent they believe that they do that. Our baseline data was that 68% of our elementary students said that that was something they would score themselves favorably in. This past spring, that went up to 69%. And then 2 years ago in 22, our secondary students, we had 65% of them indicate that they felt that they did that. And that number went down to 62% for self-reporting this past year. And then as we look at moral and ethical character development as a domain, similar situation through Panorama. This is focusing on a very specific question. So that's why you're seeing the words targeted question there. There's a question on the Panorama survey that asks students to indicate the extent to which they were respectful of others who had different views than they do. And again, if they put a 3, a 4, or a 5, they would indicate that they scored themselves favorably within this area. And you can see how the numbers did go up, but just not quite by 3%. They went up by 2% respectively for elementary as well as for secondary. And then as we close out the Panorama piece, you can see the psychological development domain, and that aligns with social perspective on the Panorama survey. Once again, students indicating the extent to which they try to understand others' point of view. And that number, as far as rating that question or that area favorably, went down by 1%. And then finally, last Panorama piece here is within the career development domain. Within the self-management section of the Panorama survey, percentage of students who scored favorably on the extent to which they manage their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. And you can see that went up by 1% for our elementary grades, and it went down by 3% for our secondary students. So I will pause there because the next set of indicators comes off of a different data source.
How far back do our Panorama surveys go?
I would have to double check our assessment schedules at least 3 years.
Yeah.
I believe. I'd have to double check as I log in, and I know as a district, and I'd have to double check for accuracy here that I believe we phased in that approach as well. So I can say with confidence, the last 2 school years, we had both the fall and the spring window. And as part of our coherent governance work, it's been spring to spring.
Yeah. I mean, I see the value in asking the questions. I guess I struggle a little bit with using some of this information in a as a metric for success on things. I think as an example of what we don't want to happen, I think about when you like buy a car and they're like, be sure you fill out the survey and put 100% on every single thing, otherwise nothing counts. Like the social perspective thing, I think about people being introspective and saying, yeah, I could do a better job of that. I wonder what these numbers look like going, what's the average? What would you expect historically? Is 50% about what we've gotten? Does it make sense? Like some of these, is 100% the goal? Is 75%? Like is the goal just to increase all of these numbers to 100% inevitably over time, which is obviously unrealistic. So I just struggle a little bit with using these as metrics of success. But that's not to say I don't think it's important to ask the questions. But I fail to see the value in using these as metrics for a lot of these things. Also, it seems like we're splitting ourselves so thin on so many different things. This is in what R2 we had 9. This R3, R1, I don't know how many of that are. I seem to remember at one point in time I heard that a number of districts will have like 2 metrics, like reading and math, and then we've got like 50, and it's like, how do you focus on increasing any one number over time at the expense of the other 49? It's like you can't do everything all at once all the time, right? And so I wonder how we're actually focusing in on some of these improvements over time?
I think that'll definitely be something worthy of discussion as we focus on our results policies overall and think about how we can improve this for the upcoming school year. I would also add, Jason, that an additional challenge with this policy, at least from my perspective, is that there are 9 different domains under essential life skills. So if we're holding ourselves true to saying essential life skills in all 9 domains, that's also why I've seen so many indicators. So in my opinion, if we were to continue with this particular policy, a recommendation perhaps to consider is really honing in on what is it about essential life skills, then what are we going to measure to see how we're doing?
To build a little bit on Jason's comment. It's hard for, I think, us to understand, is that a good number, an average number, a number to be concerned with? Because we have no measuring stick to judge it against. I'm just wondering, I understand Panorama is voluntary, so I'm always curious, well, how many students chose to take the exam? That would be good information, but is there more broad-based numbers that we can look at, either all districts that have taken Panorama or the ones in Wisconsin? Because if we'll take any one of these other points of view, or at 50% in 2023 for the spring. Well, if the average is 90%, 50 would be very concerning. If the average is 40%, 50 is not so bad. So it's hard for me to really look at a number other than, like Jason said, well, is the goal just to have it go up? I'm just kind of curious as how does it compare to, I know Panorama is a commonly used tool. How does that compare in aggregate to other districts?
Yeah, I think that's something we'd have to look further into if that's something we want to include moving forward. Like all metrics, we have to think about validity and reliability, which we've done our best, right? As far as the number of policies we've put together over the past year. Just my experience in being in about 13 of these policies is that we have a lot of indicators, again, well-intentioned, right? We really were trying to think through that first year. What is it we want to measure? Not looking at what other districts have done as well for those indicators, but I can say with confidence, just looking at the results category alone, we're measuring a lot. And if our goal is to do something about what we're measuring, then we're going to want to reduce. And when I presented OE11, that was just that one policy of OE11 was 26 indicators. So we could potentially be putting ourselves in a position of just constantly looking at data and not really being able to talk. What I think you probably want to talk more about is what are we doing with that information?
Yeah, I agree with 100%, Stephen. Particularly, we want to be able to look at any of these OEs and whether it be us, member of the community, teachers who have, you should be able to look at it and be able to glean very quickly, is this a positive, neutral, or is this a concern area? And I agree, in some of these, it's really hard to tell, well, is this good, bad, or just average? So I think that'll be a great discussion for the 11th.
My concern is that there are more indicators than minutes that we have for the meeting on the 11th. But also following up on what Jason and Ed are talking about, I wonder about if I think it's good to ask students, are you able to, I forget how it's phrased and I'm not on that page right now, but asking them about their own ability to understand others' points of view. But then I also wonder if more important information, and whether it's for reporting results or just something completely separate, is those who are experiencing bullying and seeing a reduction in that versus an increase in students reporting that they're better at understanding others' points of view. So that's one thought. And then another is also the YRBS is great. And it's really, I personally think the YRBS is one of the best tools that we have to get at some of the things that we're really concerned about, like mental health and other risk behaviors. And maybe that is an area where we can get at some of these other indicators, because they do ask about experiencing bullying and other forms of harm. And although I don't know if it's about while they're at school specifically or not, but so I'm one, like, and also the YRBS gives the opportunity to compare with the rest of the state. So those are my thoughts at the moment.
I recall that we really struggled last year in putting this together because it is very challenging to try to measure some of these areas. And I look at some of those questions and I wonder how students are in third grade interpreting those, or maybe in sixth grade interpreting those, and what sort of explanation or, is given prior to that, taking that assessment. Because I think people have a different understanding as they go through, their learning process and maturing. So I am kind of struggling with some of that. And, again, that's something that we may want to look at as we reevaluate this, because it is a lot. And I wonder if some of those questions really do, some of the questions that we picked, do they really show whether a student has learned self-management skills? So I see us maybe honing in on a few areas that might be a little bit easier to measure rather than this entire group of questions. So thanks for all of your work on it, though, because I mean, going through all of these is very challenging.
My mic was on that whole time, but I did want to add just to what Chris was saying. Yes, like I feel like when we are talking through these things, it's a lot of like criticism, but from my perspective, like the work is very much appreciated. And yeah, I just had to add that.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Our academic and career planning survey is delivered to our students through Infinite Campus, and then they're given time in their homerooms to take this. The first two questions you see up there, our first one is measuring percent of 11th grade students who indicate they do not have a post-secondary plan. It's for either college or career by 1%. So we wanted to decrease, and you can see that we did decrease that. And the celebration is 76.9% of our juniors have a plan for college or career during that junior year. And then our seniors had a significant decrease that not to 9% who don't, and 91% do have a plan for college or career when they're leaving. And then we ask our seniors, do they have a backup plan? Because we all know our first plan may not be what comes to be. And we did have a decrease to 28.8. So that means 71.2 do have a backup plan if their first career or college plan is not going to happen as they intended. If you scroll down that second question, then if you scroll down, we ask all of our students how academic and career planning is preparing them for college and career. And this was the first time we've asked our students if they feel what we're offering through academic and career planning. We have different benchmarks set for every grade level. They happen in different ways through content, through launch experiences, through homeroom and advisory. And you can see we gathered our baseline data this year in that first column. And then if you go down, we also gathered baseline data this year around our essential traits. Our essential traits have a motto of lead, care, and contribute, and they break down to individual skills that our community felt every graduate should lead with. So this year, as our students were taking the career-based learning survey, we asked our juniors and seniors if they felt they were prepared to lead, care, and contribute. In both of our grade levels, in baseline data, you will see that they feel they are more confident in caring, then contributing, and then leading. So it'll be interesting to see over the next years how that continues to grow and what the data continues to show. So this was our first year measuring students' perception of lead, care, and contribute. I think that's, yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. It's a lot. Thank you. I know a lot went into preparing this report and sharing the information, so thank you. Then if we can move on to 9F, and this would be the consent agenda item that was removed for separate consideration. That was the professional educator resignations.
I had asked to have that removed for additional discussion. I understand that we have a legal obligation to approve hires and resignations and contract changes, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with anything or question about that. But I guess Julie, and I'll ask the rest of the board for their input. We know that attracting and retaining staff is very critical to the success of the district. And we see the resignation lists every month that we occur. And I imagine we're building to our peak right now because we're in the summertime. But it's very difficult for me as a board member. And I would see value in having some analysis done and shared with us that look more at the trends. Because there's a world of difference between, like you were saying, Julie, somebody had a life change and they're leaving the area, or whatever that may be, as opposed to they left for another district, they left to go into industry. And then if we're doing exit interviews, I'd really, even if we have to do it in a closed session, I'd like to understand, well, why are teachers leaving the district? As I look back at the last several months and I recognize some of the name, there's some very fine teachers with a lot of years of experience that have chosen to leave the district, and in some very difficult areas like special ed. So I would feel more comfortable as a board member understanding the trends, and is there something there that should be informing policy and things that we should be looking at in addition to just the listing from month to month. I really enjoy seeing that if it's not too much work on an annual basis, whatever frequency makes sense, maybe towards the end of as the school year progresses, you have people leaving and people joining. So that was just my comment, and I'll open it up for other people to add to that. Certainly, I don't want a lot of work done just for my benefit, but curious if the rest of the board had an interest in that as well.
Yeah, I think that was really well put, and I agree very much that I think that more information and along those lines would be really helpful, just so we can understand. I know that we've talked about how important retention is, and there's a lot of talk in the news about teacher shortages and people leaving the industry, and so understanding, do we have a problem? Do we not have a problem? What are we doing to address it? That type of information would be very helpful.
I would appreciate that information as well. And then just clarification too on the process for when individuals do leave the district. What is the process that we're using to gather information as to why they're leaving? I know at one time there was an interview process, I think, and Julie, I think you can probably help out on this. I think it may have shifted a little bit more to a survey, and just kind of how that process works would be really helpful too to know, and how much input we do get as people move from the district for whatever reason it is that they're moving out.
am I okay to respond now, or can I field a plan and perhaps a proposal? So if I could address, Chris, your question first. Yes, so our process when somebody leaves the district is as part of their resignation communication, there is an exit survey. We do encourage in-person exit interviews as well. So I and Dave Pinnenberg traditionally engage in those unless it's one of our staff members that we oversee. So there's some distance and people feel free to share. I would say that is also after the administrator who oversees typically engages in discussions and is there anything that we can do to retain you, things of that nature. So there are kind of multi levels and steps there. Typically when it's a resignation, it gets to my point. There may be some things I can do as far as recovery, depending on assignment, things of that nature. So we've been successful in some of those aspects as well. But that's our traditional process and the information that we gather. Now, not often sometimes people put within their letter where they're going. Sometimes we have to outreach to their former administrator to ask what was the reason for the resignation. We always follow up with the individual if it's not put in the letter, so we can gather that data as accurate as possible. That's been our process. I'm happy to put together something if you would think it would be helpful, either in a format or report to the board, or if it's similar to when we had the work session on recruiting and retention, if you want that more focused on retention or what the cadence might be. Part of the challenge is there is fluidity, as you see from the amount of hires and resignations throughout the year. Our data set that we take is the first day that teachers are under contract or the employee group is under employment through the day that they come. So right now our data set ends for resignations on the 25th of August when our staff come back. That's our window of time.
So given, Julie, given I know you've been doing this a while, have you noticed any differences in either the surveys or in the personal interviews in terms of, are there any trends that you can identify right now, or is that something that you might want to look at for responding?
Yeah, I would probably want to look further. I would say traditionally those who request to meet usually have broader topics that they want to bring to light than just the reason why they're exiting. So those individuals tend to share more. I would say the participation we did embed it in all employee groups and extend that offer out. But the participation, I would say the number of resignations that we receive exit interview survey is probably around 30% to 40%. When we did in-person interviews, it was the entire leadership team. There was less resignations at that time. And I would say we were pretty tenacious to the point that we had some employees saying, I'm just leaving. I don't want to meet, but we had some, we do have some great executive assistants that would call repeatedly trying to schedule exit interviews. There was multiple levels of follow-up. Is there a preference on a board work session or a written report or a cadence to that?
I was going to say that my preference would be for like not just a standalone work session, but some sort of regular, consistent reporting on this. And the reason is I know that the issue of teacher hiring, and retention is not unique to our district. It is nationwide, statewide. And when you put that in the context of what's going on in our state with the budget right now and not knowing what's all going to happen with that, I mean, I just think there is a level of urgency to this issue that we should really be, you know, as a board, we should be as informed as we possibly can so that if there are things we can do at the policy level, we're equipped to do that.
And just because we're talking about it, I wonder like how many teachers are actually leaving to private schools? Because at least I know in Minnesota, talking to my colleagues there, there's that difference in pay as well too, and there are some private schools that pay really well compared to public schools, and so having that knowledge would be helpful. I think to your question, Julie, about the reporting of it, I would appreciate it in just writing would be fine.
Do you recall when we did the last work session? Was that 6 months ago?
Approximately, yes.
So maybe as we look at the work session time availability, that we could come up with a time. I think, you know, certainly a written report is nice, but I also think conversation can be very helpful because just, I think it's easier to ask questions and then hear what other questions that, you know, may surface in the room. So thoughts?
Julie, I don't know if this could be part of OE4. I don't know if it is within operational expectation 4 anywhere. Maybe we can talk about it at that time. We have several topics that are kind of lined up for time on work sessions. And so if personnel is already somewhere, it's already on our agendas for board meetings, maybe it can be part of a board meeting, or maybe when we go over OE4, I'm not sure, but we're into the fall in terms of open work sessions for topics outside of what we already cover.
But that being said, when something might come up with the agenda, for instance, we're talking about the budget, if there are, you know, pertinent thoughts or ideas that would be, you know, you wouldn't hesitate to share ideas. You know, and I'm saying that I'm sure that you would share, you know, this. And I also believe that you do look for, you have individuals that you work with and communicate with that you're looking for, like sometimes with the handbook language and sorts of things, or so.
Yeah, I think I can give just a quick high-level overview. One of the pieces why compensation discussions are so critical at this time as I connect with other colleagues in the area. The districts that are not settled continue to have those questions and candidates starting to decline because it's the unknown of where that compensation is. Now that's challenging where the budget is, and we've engaged in those discussions. But as you saw, our exchange of proposal is scheduled for Wednesday. Part of that is summer schedules with both sides there. The other piece, just on the policy piece, I would like to touch base on. We did do quite a few things this year in response to retaining and recruiting candidates, particularly retaining, like the expanded tuition reimbursement for support staff, educators that are requested to teach outside of that area, some reimbursement for flexibility for the praxis and those certifications, further developing the aspiring administrator program that we have in the district that Tiffany Firks really comes around, removing the requirement a little bit ago to We used to restrict people from moving positions. They couldn't move positions until they were here for 3 years, which resulted sometimes in people taking positions elsewhere if they had a desired area they wanted to teach. The enhancement to the FMLA leave. Currently, we're exploring PTO as a work group for added flexibility and things of that nature to retain employees. So those are some of the things that I can include just as a high level. But in whichever format, if that's through the OE process on an annual basis, we do have the scorecard as well, where we target a lot of that work, which I could provide you with on our website too. So I'm happy to report and share with you all I know about recruitment and retention and the work that's been performed.
I just would like to just make one comment, and really to extend gratitude to those who are moving on from the district for all of their contributions to the AASD and to the students here, and just wish them all the best in their next endeavors.
Okay, that being said, we better approve 7, and now it is 9F. I'll make a motion that we approve the professional educator resignations as submitted.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion on this? Then roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Okay, it takes us to the end of our agenda. We do have a meeting on Wednesday morning. It's a special board meeting for the purpose of superintendent evaluation and board self-evaluation. And then our next regularly scheduled board meeting would be Monday, July 24th. So ask for a motion to adjourn. Or I'll
Move
make
to
a motion to adjourn. Someone do it. Thank you, Nick. I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you and have a good night.